What's up, everyone? So a lot of you have been requesting a mixing tutorial, or where I go in and I start mixing a track. So I didn't really have too much, and it's a bit difficult for me to show those ones since I pretty much like create and mix and master all in tandem, so as I'm going along. It's not the best way to do it, it's the way that I do it. So I found a project here that I hadn't looked at in a while, and it's got quite a bit of cleaning up to do. It's not sounding too bad, but I think there's definitely some tips you guys can learn if you follow along. So I'll play it through and then we can get it going. It's essentially just like it's built out to the start of the drop. So we're basically going to look at like how I would go about this.
In your eyes, I wanna know who you really are. Baby, coming to the light. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
So yeah, as you can see, it's the main part of the idea is there, but there's quite a bit going on. Like if you watch the span, it's sort of all over the place. It's not consistent. So as we go in, the first thing I want to look at is the vocals. And now I've left every instrument, by the way, like just on its own thing, so I can show you how I sort of group them. So the vocals are grouped. I'm going to start actually by setting up two more channels. I'm going to call one side chain. Make that black. I'm going to call this one pre-master. If I can type master. So the side chain will enter the pre-master. And the pre-master then goes to the master. And you set both of these to in. So essentially anything we want sidechained, which is basically everything except for the drums and the vocals, will go through the sidechain. And on that, I'm going to chuck a shaper box. And set this up as so. There's other videos I show on how to set up the sidechain, so I am going to rush through it on this one. But essentially just set it up on the volume automation so it looks like that. Set it to a quarter and then MIDI trigger one shot. And then we will start looking at doing our buses. So our vocals, we're going to put those all as yellow. Maybe something a little bit nicer. And we're going to go assign track color to all tracks.
I wanna know what you dream about tonight.
So essentially what I've done here is like I've got the main vocal. And then this one here is... It's just a repetition, except it's reverbed and it's got an auto pan that's sort of fluttering it left and right, and I filtered it down a bit. So essentially that acts as a backing vocal.
I wanna know what you dream about tonight.
And then I've also got this one down here, which instead of a reverb, so I've duplicated it, instead of a reverb, I've still got the auto pan on, but now I've got a delay. So then I just put one syllable on there. So now when I play it, instead of it just sounding like this,
I wanna know what you dream about tonight.
You get the dry signal and then you get the singular last syllable delayed and panned and filtered down, and then you get the whole of the thing again sort of reverb back. So it's almost like you're manually doing two different types of delay. But if you listen,
I wanna know.
oh sorry,
I wanna know what you dream about at night. I see the future in your eyes.
so it's a really easy way, and then you can like just work out the volume on these. Like I've dropped the volume right back on the reverbed one there, but we're gonna send the vocals to the pre-master because we want them to bypass the sidechain. And then the whole group here, I've essentially chucked on. So I've got a soothe.
I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna
So that was just taming some high frequencies that I found were a bit resonant. And then I've got a vocal rack on here.
I wanna know.
Essentially, it's just got a dry, then a reverb at 100%. Like this is a fully wet reverb channel, a fully wet delay channel, another delay.
I wanna know.
Except this one. This one's followed by a manipulator. So a manipulator is a plugin by Polyverse, by Infected Mushroom. And you can do like form and shifting and it has all this weird stuff, but you can often like chuck a vocal or something through here and flick through the presets and layer it as like a second layer that has a different type of harmonic build up to it. And then I've got another dry layer that's just a glue compressor with a double on.
I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know.
So the D-doubler is a free plugin. I'd highly recommend it.
I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know.
Might even boost that up. So all together, these then stack up.
I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know.
And it really just gives it a lot more space. Then what I'm doing is I'm cutting off everything below 200 and I'm like slowly tapering it up.
I wanna know.
Now the reason I do that is because if you look at the span,
I wanna know.
you'll notice that it's very mid-heavy and there's not a lot of high information. So we compensate for that.
I wanna know.
We also want to like cut off any low end.
I wanna know. I wanna know.
And then I'm compensating for that more by adding an OTT on, which is pretty much just on like the standard settings, except it's at 30% the times at 1,000.
I wanna know. I wanna know.
So really these two are like essentially balancing out, like reducing the mids and increasing the highs just through some EQ and compression. This is adding a bunch of effects on and the soothe is just taming some harshness at the beginning. So now when we listen,
I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about at night. I see the future in your eyes.
so I think the vocals are sounding pretty good for now. Like when we look at the
I
span,
wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light.
you know, they're not overpowering everything else. I mean, if they're up here,
I wanna know who you really are.
that would obviously be a bit too much. And if it was down here,
I wanna know who you really are.
it'd be a little bit too quiet.
I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light.
Really, when you have vocals playing, it's like, especially in a sense of like they are the focus, because they're the focus, you want them to be the loudest element. So often people forget to do that. They put their synths and everything around so much that they forget that the vocal needs to actually be the loudest element when it's playing, because that's what people are listening to and what they're singing along to. I mean, if you look in any pop song and hip hop and that sort of stuff, like the vocal heavily overpowers most of the other stuff. It's not like badly overpowering, but like it's noticeable that it's louder because those are very vocal oriented tracks. So when we go through, now that we've sorted out the vocals, I want to look at our main synths. So when we start, so for starters, you'll notice these ones are all turned off. So I'm going to move them up here because we don't want to worry about them. So this one's basically some chords that I made and then flattened out. And you'll notice that I'm filtering them up, and I'm tapering off the low end. So without these, filtering up and like introducing elements slowly is really essential. And you see I do that with this one as well. So I'm actually going to group these and call it intro synths. And that one's going to go to the sidechain. Because if there's any drum work happening that needs a sidechain, I want them to be sidechained. So I'm going to color this blue, let's say. And then we're going to go through and we're going to add what we want to this. So the bass, that is a synth as well. I mean, it's when I say synth, I'm not talking about leads. I'm talking about just like the normal elements. So this bass here, now something to know about this one is that when we look at span, you can see that the low end is really messy down there, and the reason for that is because it's a Reese, so you've got voices on both of the basses, so they do have a sub, which is kind of doing a little bit, but it's not too much. Now what I've done is this originally was up here. But what I did was I reduced the sides quite heavily, because what happens is when you make Reeses, you will find quite often, if I turn this down like that, what happens is the voicing causes like the width to really get out of hand. So you want to taper that off at the lows, like have nothing in the lows, and then like across the board just reduce it. And what this does is it pushes it more towards the middle. Now this isn't essential, but I find that for mono compatibility and because it is a low element, having it more towards the center just sounded better to me. The second thing I do is completely taper off the lows. And then I do that again for some reason here. I don't know why I did that twice. But the first thing we'll do is we want to replace this. We want to add a solid sub into it. So all we do for that is duplicate it. Like duplicate the whole thing. We're going to turn off all the effects, or delete all the effects. So I like writing my basses in 0, so C0 up to B0 here. So we don't need to change anything about the melody. And then what we do is we can open this serum, initialize the preset, and then just turn on a sub. So now we have a solid sub which is following the bass progression. And you can add on some distortion to this if you want. Increase the volume. Now when we add this onto the Reese, so what you will also notice here is that this staccato sort of fluttery chord has some bass in it. So we want to actually remove that too, because you only want there to be one sub. So this one we can... Now it's important that we remove the bass, but we don't remove so much that we lose the character of the sound. So as you go along, you'll hear when I get to the point where the character of the sound sort of goes away. Still good. See, now the sound is sounding thin. So obviously this harmonic here, this one here, we want to keep in, but this one here we don't want to. And now we have a really solid defined sub. Now I know that's more related to sound design, but I think it's an essential thing with mixing, because replacing the subs that you have in your patches with a defined sub is really what you want to be doing as much as you can, so that you can really clean up your low end. Now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy, I'm going to go into the Reese. So what I've done is I clicked on Serum, held down Shift, and then clicked on EQ8. So it highlighted all of them, and then I'm going Command or Control G. And then I'm clicking in here to open up the instrument rack. And I am now going to hold the Serum and then drop it onto this. And then I can delete that whole other MIDI channel, because now I have the sub as its own layer. So now I just have to write the MIDI. So now as you can see, the sub is integrated into this patch essentially by having the instrument rack here. And what that does is it allows us to clean up. We don't have to have two channels now. So quite often that's what I'll do. It's like, make your bass, whether it's a Reese, whether it's a bass in the drop or something, then make a new sub. And just, that's why I write in 0, because what happens is then when you go and make that sub, you don't have to worry about changing the octaves or anything. You just literally turn off the oscillator and turn on the sub and leave it at 0. You don't have to start messing around with the octaves here. Again, like, it's not the end of the world if you have to, but it's just easier as a rule of thumb. So the other stuff that I have is like, there's a lot of sort of drums in the intro. So I have these, like, I think it's called a djembe. I'm probably butchering that. But it's like these tribal little drums. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to group all of these up. I'm going to send them straight to the... Well, I'm going to send these to the sidechain as well. Now the reason I'm doing that is because these aren't like heavy drop drums. So they don't, like, I'm not sidechaining anything to these. So they also could be treated as instruments. So I'm going to call these intro drums. So yes, they are getting sent to the sidechain, but they are not... That is because they are not like major sort of drums. That can go in there.
What you dream about? I see the future in your eyes.
We've also got all these risers coming in here. So the first thing I'm going to do is group these. I'm going to call it effects. Again, that's going to be going to the sidechain. And I'm going to make this light blue. Now, any effects you have, you always want to just chuck an EQ on and cut the lows. So I'm going to copy this. And what that does, it just ensures that there's no low-end information building up. And you know, like, an EQ8's not going to use up too much CPU power, so you can put as many of those as you want.
I wanna know.
I'm going to also add this one up into the drums, this little, it's like a snare roll. This is actually a pretty cool sound, so I'll go through sort of what I did here. So when you make, because obviously mixing and sound design, they're sort of integrated, but
I wanna know.
you can use this as a fill, where essentially you chuck a clap or a snare, and you repeat it, so you sort of stutter it. So then what I've done here is I've done one chain with reverb. So it's at about 50% dry wet, but the decay, I actually keep the decay down super short so that the reverb is super short until you get to this last one and then it boosts up. Because if I had this long the whole way, see, it's a bit less like clean, a bit less stuttery. And then I have a delay on here, which is why you hear it delaying down there. And then I'm basically just using like an EQ to filter that up. Or filter it down. And a bit of glue compression. So when we start going into this section here,
the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are.
so these three, these are like break drums. So I'm going to call them break drums. And they're going to be going to the pre-master because these are now like, these are your heaviest style drums. So we're actually going to need to sidechain everything else to these.
What you dream? I wanna know.
But the thing is, I only have a snap actually here. So like this doesn't really need to be sidechained, but the kick will need to be sidechained. So what we can do is we start the sidechain. We go up to where our drums are, and we're going to make, so Command Shift T to make a MIDI channel. And I'm going to draw in like a little bit of MIDI here. I'm going to keep it short because the length of the MIDI affects like when the actual sidechain envelope starts. And we're just going to put this on all the kicks. And what this will do is it'll knock the low end out of the way. And we're going to do the output of that to the sidechain, and it automatically should go to the shaper box. So the way that you test it is go into your sidechain. And you notice here, see that's dropping? But now we have to take all of our basses in here. This is another one that's not being used, so I'm going to chuck that up there. Don't really know what was going on with this group, so I'm just going to delete that. Clean this up a bit for you guys. So this one I'm going to call break melodic bass, or BRK mel bass for short. So that's going to be going to the sidechain. Now essentially what this is a sub topped with this sound that I made. You can check the patch if you want. I'm not going to go through how I... Now, when we run this through, so see, everything's ducking out the way of that bass now. of the kick, sorry, because we have this sidechain trigger here. So we'll chuck that on there.
I wanna know what you dream about.
Now, when we start this part, we have a pretty prominent bass, and this one's going to be clashing with our vocals. So if we look at the makeup of the bass, we see that it's a full spectrum sound. We see that our vocals,
I wanna know.
they are very present up in our mid region up to our highs.
I wanna know.
So mixing these then becomes a little bit of an issue. Now, one thing you can do is you can duck out the frequencies in the main sound from the vocals. Now, I do this with Soothe, by sidechaining with Soothe. And that's the best way to do it, but not everyone has Soothe. I highly recommend getting it.
I wanna know.
And that's essentially like why, because I'm doing some serious ducking of this sound. If I turn that Soothe
I
off,
wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are.
now obviously you can do that to a lesser extent by just finding a Pro Q
I wanna know.
and finding the main part of the vocal here, so like this 500 to 2K region, and dipping that out of the bass. But the main idea is that you want to try and get the frequencies out of the bass that are really clashing with the vocals.
I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes.
The other thing too is that stereo-wise, what I've done is I'm bouncing this sound around from left to right with this automation here. And the reason for that is because when the vocals are playing, you usually want them to be centered.
I wanna know.
So in the stereo field, I actually want the bass to play around this a bit. Not the sub, because there's no sub in the vocals. So the sub I can just leave in the center because that's down in the low end. But the mid bass here, that's clashing with the vocals. This I'm trying to move around.
I wanna know.
And what that does, it really enriches the stereo field. And then if we add on this,
I wanna know what you. I see the future in your eyes. I see the.
now you'll notice here I start filtering up the chords again. So it's like I've brought them up here. Now the reason for that is because I didn't want them to be playing when the vocal came in.
I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know.
But to be honest, they sound pretty good. So we have to sort of think like, well, what do we want to do? Because we're already clashing the vocals with the mid bass. So like, how do we get this in here without it sounding shit? So at the moment,
I wanna know what you dream about.
so the first thing that you could do is obviously we can take the same approach that we took with the mid bass, where we copy the Soothe, and then we basically just
I
allow.
wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light.
But the problem that I found with doing this was that it really took away from the nature of that bass, because the bass is jumping around, so we didn't really want that too much. So if we go back now,
I wanna know what you dream the future.
So now you can really focus on that bass, but it sort of seems a bit static. So I would say we should probably chuck some form of exhaust into here.
I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes.
But the other thing too is that now that we are leaving it stripped back to just the bass and the vocals, and then obviously we've got this like simple drum beat. The thing is, like, we really want this bass to have impact. We really want this bass to have impact. And at the moment, it doesn't have as much because the soothe is like working so heavily on it.
I wanna know.
So if we like take this and we take the vocal and we just look at our stereo field, we want to sort of look at like what's lacking here.
I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes.
So if we dial back the soothe,
I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light. I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light.
now one option that we could look at is because the vocal is using a lot of the mid-range, then on the bass we could really increase the low end and the top end to compensate and almost mold it around in the frequency range. But the problem is we're already sort of pushing -7 LUFS and we're in the breakdown here and the intro, so we don't really want to be getting drop style loudness.
What you dream about.
Like that's sort of a good range because my drop's going to be sitting a bit hotter. Although the drop was pretty loud, so maybe I can get away with it. So why don't we give it a go? So what we would do is we would chuck a... So I've dialed back the soothe quite a lot too. But what I would do on the bass is on this group, I chuck a Pro Q here.
I wanna know.
And now if we just solo the vocal, and we look at it on the span,
I wanna know.
we can see that like 500
I wanna know.
to 4K
I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna.
is very prominent, so we don't really want to boost that region.
I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about.
So this is a cool little section here. So what we notice is that from about 100 through to 400-500, there's a bit of a pocket that we can raise the bass up in without impacting the vocal too much.
I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know.
We could also look at raising this up.
I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes.
And then we could look at reducing where the vocal is sitting.
I wanna know.
But if we're going to do this, I might actually take the soothe off that's like reducing that already, so that we can really just do it with the Pro Q.
I wanna know what you dream about. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light.
Remember, when you're carving stuff out, like, don't take too much to the point where the whole character of the sound is gone. Like, if I solo this... See, like, it's still sounding like it was. It's just sounding a bit mixed differently. But if I do this... Like the whole character's gone. So you got to be really sparing with this. But now what we find is that this whole section where the vocal's sitting, we've moved that out the way and we've boosted up the sections where the vocal isn't hitting. Now we might want to increase the sub here as well. And we add the vocal in.
I wanna know.
The other thing too,
I wanna know.
I think the vocal is actually a bit too hot in that middle region, so I just want to take a Pro Q.
I wanna know. I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about at night.
So just reduce that there.
I wanna know. I wanna know what you dream about at night. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
So now we get into the build section. So when we get into the build section, we now have these 3 layers here. So this is a bass from the Geico War Island plugin, which is just heavily saturated. Now what we can see here is that there's a lot of stereo low end. So what I'm going to do is take a Pro Q. Move that down here. So I'm going to do a sharp cut. And then make that the sides. But what you can see is that the low end is still really messy in the mids. The problem is like just cutting the sides out of a sound that was made with stereo, like your bass is still going to have fluctuations. So what we're going to do is we're going to not just cut the sides here, we're actually going to cut the entire stereo spectrum, so just at about 100. And then same thing, I'm going to make a new bass for that part. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy the Serum bass, like this sub that we made for the intro. Just copy that chain. And then again, I'm going to highlight all 3 of these when holding Shift, Command G, and go in here and then click in there and Control V to like paste the Serum. But the problem now is that because these were written in 2, we now need to go onto the sub and drop this down to. So now what we get is the same sound, but now we have a solid sub. So the next one that we're working with is this sound here, which is essentially... it's like a Reese. Now this Reese has a lot of middle sort of frequencies on it. Sorry, side frequencies. So we're going to look what this happens in mono. So maybe this could do with like a little bit of a boost in the mids. So I'm just going to do a wide Q on the Pro Q here and put the stereo placement as mid.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
Unmono that.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
So this is the problem we run into, is that because we have the vocal still in the center, we almost want to push the mids out of the way on this one here, so that it sits out the way of the vocal. But the problem is,
I see the future in your eyes.
if we do that,
I see the future.
while it sounds good in stereo,
I see the future in your eyes.
we lose a lot of volume on it in mono.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the.
So we compensate and we say, okay, maybe our stereo clarity isn't going to be as good, but because this is dance music and it's mainly going to be played in big systems, we're going to allow more of the mids through on that bass.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in.
They're also not clashing too much, you know, it's a case-by-case basis. The next thing we got is these chords, or these strings.
I see the future in your eyes.
And then these are again playing off this, this one here.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future.
So these are all going to be added into the intro synths bus. Add these up here, we'll make everything... Whoa, what happened there? What did I do?
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
Now, when you get to these situations here, where we have a bass, multiple sort of synth elements, and vocals all playing on top of one another, and you are trying to figure out what to do, it can be a bit tricky, because you could start panning stuff. So we could say we want that to go left, and we want this to go right.
I see the future in your eyes. 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 I see the future in your eyes.
That's one way to do it, and usually that's better than cutting all the mids and just putting sides on them. It's better to actually put one, make them a bit more mono, and then push them either side. But what you find is that if you start pushing something left, then the thing on the right, if that doesn't sound as good or vice versa, as big, we need to compensate. We need to add volume to it, because at the moment, it sounds very in the left. So what we would want to do is add a utility on and boost up the chord. Sorry, that was the wrong one. Now we look at our bass. You can also offset the thing that's a little bit less powerful. You can push it further out onto the side that it's on in comparison to the thing on the other side. And that almost like offsets the balance. Now if we add in the vocals.
I see the future in your eyes.
But we would definitely want to add on a soothe here that activates when the vocals are on. So I'm going to drag this one onto the intro synths here, onto the whole bus.
I see the future in your eyes.
So that when that vocal's playing, it's working. And essentially all that happens is like you drop a soothe onto the channel that you want to get ducked. In your sidechain options here, so you go to vocals, because we want the sidechaining to come from the vocals. And then in the actual plugin, we just turn on the sidechain button here.
I see the future in your eyes.
And the way that you'll notice it is that nothing will be happening until the vocals start, or like whatever you're using to sidechain from, and then that's what'll start ducking things.
I see the future in your. I wanna know what you dream about tonight. I see the future in your eyes. I wanna know who you really are. Baby, come into the light.
We could also experiment with allowing more of these chords through in the vocal section now that we are actually dropping them down with the soothe.
I wanna know what you dream about tonight. I see the future in your eyes.
But again, it takes away from the impact of those basses when they start, so I'm just going to leave it as is.
I see the future in your eyes.
Now we have a build kick coming in here. So what we want to do is take this side chain here and duplicate that wherever that kick is.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
But what we can see is that having a full side chain, it actually causes some issues. So what do we do in this situation? Well, there's two things that you could do. The first one is that you could create an additional side chain that's only used for the build. And what we might do for that is we'll have a second shaper box. And we're going to make this a much tighter sort of thing here. And then we could start to duplicate the thing, and this only activates as we build, but it gets a bit complex. So what I actually prefer to do is, instead of side chaining using the normal side chaining method for the build, I'll actually just chuck a utility on the main ones that I want affected by the side chain, and I'll manually do it.
Future in your eyes.
And usually you don't need anything too spectacular. Now if we look down at this kick, it's the main body's here in this first little bit, and then it sort of like tapers out over 3. So if we look up maybe something like that.
I see the future in your eyes.
And we just want to listen.
I see the future in your eyes.
It's maybe a bit too heavy-handed, so we might bring this back a bit. Try that.
I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes.
But as we go up, usually what I'll do is I'll start to decrease the effect of the sidechain, because as the kicks get faster, like the sidechain being at full strength is just a little bit too much. So we start reducing the hole that it's actually making. You know, like when we get to here, probably don't even need to do it like that. We just reduce it. So now, like, we see that this is getting nicely ducked, and we just want to make sure that nothing else is really in the way. The vocals we're actually not going to do any ducking on. Definitely, like, in the intro and in the build, I like to keep the vocals, at least, like, spoken phrases and stuff, away from the sidechain, because you can add sidechain on, like, repetitions of vocals, but the main ones, you sort of want to let them bypass the sidechain. The other thing too is that, like, your vocals don't really sit in the low end. So, like, often your sidechain is mainly low end stuff. But personally, because I come from more of a dubstep background when I first started producing, you know, I've been making D&B for a long time now, but like when I first started producing, I made more dubstep and trap and stuff like that in halftime. So I like I personally like the builds that are very, like, they allow the kick to come through. In your eyes, I see the future in your eyes. And then we want to check the loudness going up, because we want to make sure that the loudness at the end of the build is not, like, too close to the drop. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. So that's alright, the loudness and the drop is definitely higher. So, obviously, like, when we get to the end of the build, we just want to, like, cut everything. I see the future in your eyes. Now, I'm going to actually just put this utility on the bass here. I see the future. Can take out that clap. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. So actually, I'm not going to cut these here. I'm going to cut them halfway, I think. Gotta re-put that on the bass. So now the sidechain is just affecting the bass here, because I found it was a bit too much on, like, the riser. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. I see the future in your eyes. In your eyes, I see the future in your eyes. So when we get into the drop now, so what I'm doing, the sub is usually what I use to, like, really level everything off. Now, I like the fundamental on span to hit this -24 line, or thereabouts. So if we go into it, I pretty much just got like this harmonic here. So bin 3 and bin 5. I've skipped bin 2 and bin 4. The sub oscillator is obviously handling this bin here. So I don't need that because that's your fundamental. And then I've duplicated this one here so that we have a little bit of side information. Because if we reduce that, it's not really affecting it too much because we don't have side information on both of them. So that's a cool trick you can do to add a little bit of width in your low end without affecting your mono too much. It's like, obviously we're not adding width onto the sub harmonic, onto this one here, although it's sort of coming through a little bit just because it's pushing up into the master. But again, like, you don't have to worry about that as much. Like, if there's a little bit coming through, it's fine. I mean, if you look at the reference track, which is Nebula by Mephius and Camo and Crooked, or is it just Camo and Crooked? I'll have to see. But they have low end like side information seeping in. It's just a rule you want to follow. But as you get better and better, you can deal with that yourself. I got a little bit of reverb coming through, but again, I got like a high-low cut on that so that there's nothing affecting the lows. And then I've got this second layer here. Which is essentially just the sub again, but I've turned on the noise, added a bit of chorus and reverb, and then I'm filtering it up. So it's just the noise that you're getting, and then using that as a second layer, and then I mix that in with the volume here of the chain. Now, usually what we want is our sub to be hitting the -24 line, and we want our highs to sort of be there, and we want that to slowly sort of taper off and then come back. So I think at the moment, the like 3 to 6K region on this synth is pretty harsh. We also want to check this in mono. It does lose some power in mono, so I'm going to take a Pro Q and I'm gonna reduce the side information. And basically we're just gonna try and like shape this sound visually, because obviously depending on your level, it's a struggle to do it without that. So we're going to add in the sub. So the first thing obviously is we're reducing the highs. I might look at increasing the mids. So put a new one, make this wider. But you can see that like it's really peaking here. So what I'm going to do is reduce. But instead of making it just the mids, I'm going to put the stereo placement as stereo, so it's everything. And I'm going to make it dynamic so that it only happens while the sound is hot. So you see this harmonic here, we're getting some clashing because we got that in the sub, but we've also got it in the main thing. So we need to sort of like choose. So I'm going to try and taper off out of the main base. So obviously that's not going to work. So we're going to reduce it. So one thing we can add is we can continue this vocal in here. But I'm just going to take that out for now because... So when you get to your drop, you might find that like it seems like visually it's looking good, but it's sort of lacking something. So when we just solo these... It's almost like there needs to be a mid bass. So let's duplicate the sub. Delete everything. We're going to add a serum. And if we just write it here, like we can see that this is adding in, well, that's a saw wave, so it's adding it across the board. But what I'm thinking is that there's quite a lot of like harmonics missing in here. So we could try and add in sort of like a Reese. I'm going to put a high pass on this. And really accentuate that sort of low end bit. So we're looking at like the 150 to 300 range. And then we'll turn on the key tracking here. And now if we add in the sub. And obviously like we can taper off the highs as well. So we can take a EQ and just do that gradually. But the EQ on this is kind of shocking. So what I'm going to do is do that manually with an EQ here. And just like reduce the parts in this Reese that we've added out of the main bass. Doesn't seem like it's affecting it too much. We might be able to leave that full thing in there. So if you listen, See, like, we got the sub and we got the highs, but now when we add this in, we get this, like, mid bass. Definitely gonna reduce the... See, so that low region there, like, although it is often, you often told, like, to not do too much in there because it gets very muddy, like, it adds drive. Like, this has no drive. This has drive. Now, obviously, this... It's fairly wide by the nature of the way that we made the sound. But it didn't seem to be affected too much when we turned it into mono. We could play with that. We could chuck an EQ8 on, turn it on to mid side, boost the mids, and then reduce the sides. Oops. Yeah, that's not really working. Now the other thing you want to do is you can... I'm just going to move this one out the way. You can duplicate, or sorry, you can group everything, and you can chuck on like a multi-band compressor to just sort of see what happens like when you just chuck a compressor on the whole group. So what we're noticing here is that when we turn on the multi-band compressor, it's actually like reducing the mids. See, like there's nothing happening to the highs. But when we listen to like the low end, so this region here is being affected. So obviously we're having a build up. So what we might do is we might look at reducing something in here. So, I mean, there's a few things we could do. We could look at the main and like reduce this even more. Because now the mid bass is really taking this region. Might want to cut some of the highs out of that. The other thing too is like, don't be afraid to like over compress the stuff. So what we could do is we could take this whole group. We could group the top end stuff. So just the synth. And often like, you know, like this gets into territory that you guys might not be in, but you can take like a Gullfoss, which is an EQ. See, the Gullfoss now is saying that it wants us to increase the mids and reduce the highs. Chuck on an OTT. You know, we may not want to use an OTT. We might want to use like a multi-band compressor or compression. Remember, I'm just taking the lows out here because this is only affecting the mid bass and the lead, not the sub. So we don't actually want sub in this group. Another thing that I just remembered is that we haven't actually added in the side chains on the drop, so I'm just going to do that quickly. Where are... Here we go. So I'm just going to drop our sidechain MIDI channel here further up so we can work right next to all these and duplicate. Just check that's working. See, before you couldn't really hear the kick in this. And like, obviously referencing a noisier track, or sorry, not a noisier track, a Mephius, Camo and Crooked track, like they're some of the top skilled producers, especially in this genre. So like, it's difficult to reach a loudness that they will, but you can sort of see the balance that they've got. See, that sub sort of hits here. Their top end is sort of going a little bit above it. And then it sort of dips down a bit. You can see their snare peaks here. Now if you look at mine. So I would almost say that my top end drums need more compression. And the reason I say that is because when I look at the span, you can see that, like, there one. Compared to mine. I also think there's a bit of a dip here in the 600 to 1K region that could come up. So when I look at the group, I might chuck a Pro Q. So I'm just going to make it dynamic. Okay, maybe dynamic wasn't the best move for that one. It's a bit thin. And then if we go over to our high end and we increase the high end now, of our top, sorry. So we just solo that. So I might just increase the actual. The tail on these is pretty heavy, so I might just reduce that by putting it to beats mode one direction. Compared to the noisier one, I mean, oh my god, the camo and crooked one. So there's obviously a little bit more I have to do, but that's stuff I would have to go into and repeat. But I don't want the video to get super, super long, so I'm going to leave it there. I hope you guys found some tips from sort of how I approached basically just improving the mix on this one. And I can definitely do it for other tunes going forward as well, where I just like basically hop on and do a bit of mixing on something, or just do some work on a tune and I just hit record for an hour or two. Cheers for watching.